several Gebsers, and all the background info on all the folks is on the link provided. So if you want to look up the bio, persona, presentations, you can do that. But how wonderful to have you presentiate, Jessie.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, it's great being here. I have mixed feelings of like nervousness and excitement that like kind of struck me this morning, because I really have been looking forward to sharing this with you guys. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here. So let me get myself all set up. I'm going to share screen. And I'll say that my presentation runs about 30 minutes long. And can everybody see that? Is that like a good full screen size for you all? Yes. And okay, great. So it's 30 minutes more or less. And if I'm leisurely about it, it'll probably be 35 minutes. So just to kind of give you a sense of where it's all going. And what I thought I would do is I wanted to start as like a little bit of a prequel for my talk. I thought it'd be nice to read a poem that I actually wrote. And it's not a great poem. It's not for that sake, but it's really just to give us all a moment to settle in and to also maybe give you a felt sense for where the presentation is going before I dive into the intricacies of it itself. And, it's interesting, in listening to everyone's talks thus far, and, Michael, I think it's going to build and be consistent with some of the themes that you spoke about last weekend, and of course Glenn as well. So we all just kind of build on one another as we explore these topics. So the poem that I wrote is called Planck's Constant, and it reads like this: I am music, tone, rhythm, sound, cadence. I am river, streams, tributaries, vortices, falls. I am story, chapter, verse, beginnings and endings whispered before time. I am form, soft, moving, strong, shimmering, solid, supporting, translucent. I'm nature, weeping willow, wood vine, ancient fungi, prairie flower, bunny tails, hatchlets. I am creativity, spark, not knowing, uncertainty, light, silence, resonance. Aha. I am holoflux, portal, touchstone, leap point, pivot, home. So lost in translation may seem an unusual way to refer to the crisis that we're facing on a planetary level at this time, but I chose it quite deliberately. It stems from my recent fascination with neuroscience and descriptions of the right and left hemisphere of the brain that I found in the Opus work, The Matter with Things by Ian McGilchrist, which was sort of my summer project. And as I read through his volumes, it really upended my world and completely re-energized my fascination with and understanding of Gebser's thoughts. It was like it was just woven in with Gebser's thoughts in so many ways. And in Gebserian terms, the phrase lost in translation is aligned, if not synonymous, with the fragmentation and splintering of mental consciousness driven into deficient overdrive with its reign of dualism, egoism, unimpassioned objectivity. It's a digitized, mechanistic view of people and things with conceptualized truth and extreme isolation exacerbated by a 2-year-long global pandemic. And it's a description of how we, in the throes of what McGilchrist terms left hemisphere chauvinism, have become removed from the actual experiencing of life with the entirety of our beings, including that of our hearts and souls. And I'm actually not speaking directly to all of you in this room, but it just seems to be kind of a general ennui or storyline that's kind of moving through our society and through world cultures. And this is something that Henri Bergson also discusses in his writings. So instead, everything is filtered through theoretic models and concepts, figured out, analyzed, pinned down, so that our emotional and bodily disconnect can be numbed, if only for a moment. And so some examples of this disconnected, re-represented way of being in the extreme, and I'm showing these not to be upsetting, but I'm showing these just for us to give an eye to them, to see them as something where it's like we're one step removed from the reality. So it's things like the overturn of Roe versus Wade, where it's like this conceptualized thought, but yet it doesn't really take into account a woman who maybe has children already that she can't support, or that it cuts her career off, or that she can't afford to feed, or it doesn't take into the actual experiential reality. Or I was with a young friend and she said, well, if I don't take a picture, it didn't happen. Or there's the invasion of the Ukraine. There's this 300,000 tiara that you can only wear virtually that was talked about in the Wall Street Journal. There's drone strikes from a distance by remote control. There's the financial crash of 2008, the collapse of one-step removed derivatives. There's avatars. There's mass gun killings where it's almost as if the person is in a video game. And there's the crazy idea that animals don't feel pain. So in McGilchrist's The Matter with Things, he spends much of the first volume of the book presenting numerous studies among people who have autism and schizophrenia. Both groups are frequently right hemisphere compromised, and among those who've suffered strokes and have left or right brain lesions and hemispheric dysfunction as a result. And he uses this review to make clear that not only do the left and right hemispheres of the brain do different things, but more importantly, the manner in which they do them is markedly different. And so these distinctions take us far beyond the simplistic pop culture view that the right hemisphere is responsible for creativity and the left for language and logic. It's much more sophisticated than that. So McGilchrist summarizes the difference by saying that the brain's left hemisphere is designed to help us apprehend and thus manipulate the world, while the right hemisphere is there to comprehend it, to see it all for what it is. So that the right hemisphere, in his term, is the master. It comprehends the gestalt or wholeness of experience, and the left hemisphere is the emissary, or re-represents that wholeness as a devitalized version of reality, but thinks it mistakenly to be the whole story. And so in looking across the whole first volume, he details out some of these tendencies that happen between like kind of the proclivity of our right and left sides of the brain. And he does this because he looks at people where one or the other of the hemispheres has been taken out of commission. So he's got a sense of what's going on between the spheres. And so, in kind of a rather dualistic mental fashion here, I've laid them out just to give us a sense of where he's going and what he's talking about. So that we've got the left hemisphere tends to freeze frame things, where the right is better with experiencing flow and movement. There's dualism on the left, but more of a both and orientation on the right. The left breaks things into parts and believes they can be built up into a whole, where the right takes the gestalt of everything with parts incapable of explaining or helping one understand the whole. The brain is the master versus instinct and intuition of the whole body. The literal is best for the left hemisphere. The right lives for metaphor and poetry. The left thrives on the predictable, where the right is comfortable with uncertainty. The left demands proof. The right trusts impressions. The left holds a subject mechanistic object view, a kind of me-it, where the right takes in the actual experience of events and people, more of an I-thou. And the left tends toward the explicit, the right toward implicit. The left holds sharp focus to detect when we're in danger and tends toward a mechanistic, technologized view, while the right entertains a type of active passivity where it's able to take everything in and is embodied in its vitality. And then the left makes maps, the right experiences in the moment, life and living. And so then just to summarize, the left tends to be at home amongst re-representations of experience, where the right is best at taking in the actual of experience as it's happening, something which McGilchrist refers to as presencing, and again, which you might refer to with Husserl's work of also bringing in that term. So one can think of it as the difference between seeing a portrait of someone, like this woman here, who's kind of, it's a snapshot of her, it's a painting, she's frozen in time, and then a living, breathing person. And, you know, I'm showing a film of this girl who's dancing in the street, but, you know, it's like you can imagine seeing this snapshot or actually walking down the street with this gal and having this whole kind of visceral embodied experience. Or the difference between seeing a musical score, which is as if we've frozen the music into representative particles, and then the actual experience of listening to the music. So the musical experience of this visualized score is this. So, you know, they're very different kinds of experiences. And this re-representation, which is the modus operandi of the left hemisphere, relies on abstraction, in which there's a great reliance on linguistic thought, and whereby things are taken completely out of context, and complex problems we can't completely describe are turned into simpler ones that we think we can solve. All ambiguity is also eliminated by the left hemisphere, even though ambiguity and the unknown are at the core of existence. So, you know, it's like, welcome to the brain hemispheric view of Gebser's consciousness states. And as a student of Jean Gebser, I couldn't help but notice as I was reading, you know, this work, how the hemisphere seemed to at least roughly kind of mirror the unperspectival and the perspectival states as discussed in the ever-present origin. And so this hemispheric view also implies, at least for me, as I looked at it, a way through, a kind of way out of being lost in a stepped removed translation of reality, and brings new life to Gebser's description of syneresis and the diaphaneity of the consciousness states. And it offers a possibility for embracing, cultivating, and experiencing an entirely new kind of wholeness and dynamicism implicit in the futuring of ourselves side by side with our planet. So the right and left hemisphere views of our reality imply how greatly it matters where and how we place our attention in the world. And McGilchrist feels very strongly about this and writes, the choice we make of how we dispose our consciousness is the ultimate creative act. It renders the world what it is. It is therefore a moral act. It has consequences. So if these hemispheric differences are to be viewed both literally and metaphorically, it's important to recall that the right hemisphere is associated with the left side of the body, and that the left hemisphere is associated with the right side of the body. So left versus right associations are actually really quite powerful. So, for example, it's no coincidence that in many images of the Madonna and child across cultures, that Mary holds the Christ child on the left side of her body, the side where her right hemisphere is activated. It's also no coincidence that, according to Gebser, the emergence of mental consciousness and the simultaneous move away from magical and mythical included many right-sided association and a veritable ban on the left. And what's, you know, interesting, I pulled these three images to be sort of representative memes of each one of the states of consciousness: magical, mythical, and mental consciousness, 3 of the 5. And I noticed that I was looking at them, that when we look at this rock art that's some 10,000 years old, that the birdish creature that is holding a spear is holding it in his or her left hand, and that the Prince of Lilies is holding the scepter in his left hand. But yet when we get to this fresco by Raphael of Plato and of Aristotle, you can see that Plato's right hand is elevated and pointing upward towards the sky and the brain, and, you know, everything that mental consciousness stands for, the solar, the wakefulness, the sun. And Gebser, when pointing out how the left was anathema with the eruption of mental consciousness, gives by way of example this quote from a Manichaean text about the right as a path leading out of darkness. And some of you, I may have shared this with you before, but he writes, the Manichaeans, when meeting each other, extend their right hand as a sign that they've been released from darkness. And then Gebser goes on to mention other examples of the move toward the right and away from all that was associated with the left, such as moving away from the unconscious and the unknown, from women and the matriarch to the patriarch, from many gods and goddesses to one God, the Father, from clockwise and left-handed to clockwise and right-handed, cycles and circling to forks in the road and choice points, dualism, lunar, nocturnal, and twilight to solar and daylight, and unperspectival to perspectival. And this move was not insignificant, but became a matter of life and death for many, with the tyranny of the left hemisphere haunting us. So we've got the oppression of dark people, Black people, people of color, women and other heretics being burned at the stake, symbolic acts of purification whereby you bleach and whiten, alchemists all referred to as the left-hand path, the political left, so labeled, mass movements of the underprivileged, Hades and hell, cursed dark places and underworlds associated with magical and mythical, and Europeans killing off indigenous people because they were magical and mythical. So this step removed way of being sources all the way back to Parmenides, 500 BC, who heavily influenced Western philosophy and posited that one's sensory faculties lead to conceptions that are false and deceitful. He heavily influenced Plato, and then of course there followed Aristotle, whose laws of logic were not descriptions of real people, but of how a totally rational entity might think. And then of course, not to call him out as the bad guy, but we land on Rene Descartes, whom McGilchrist notes has the hallmarks of a schizoid person whose right hemisphere impaired and who contributed greatly to the move toward a left hemisphere imbalance. So to help us step away from our learned and acculturated left hemisphere reliance, I created an anthem dedicated to the right hemisphere and to the left sides of our bodies, to intuition and imagination, to our creativity and how it shows up, to metaphor and story, to music and poetry, to the magical and mythical, and to the importance of where we place our attention and how and our worldview. And so I'm just going to play this. It's a short one. It's 2 minutes long, and it's called All Is Flow. we'll return to that a little bit later on. So let's take a moment now and talk about concretion of the spiritual that Gebser describes as concomitant with the emergence of integrality. With this language, it has a bit of a left hemisphere bent that feels rather finite and static. Taken in with the addition of the right hemisphere understanding, it becomes not a thing that is concrete, but an ever-changing dynamicism of becoming in the flow of the ever-present origin. Algis Makunas alluded to this dynamicism of becoming when he spoke at last year's Gebser Society conference. During his presentation, he described this Shakti or cosmic energy as dynamicism implicit in the ever-present origin. He said he saw it as forever creating and ongoingly originating. Shelley R. Joy, in her article, The Cosmology of Consciousness, speaks about a similar type of ground of being or ever-present origin from a neuroscience quantum mechanics point of view. In her article, she brilliantly introduces and explains a meta-consciousness, an implicate order or spectral frequency domain that is outside of space-time, envisioned by eminent scholars of quantum mechanics and neuroscience David Bohm and Carl Pribram. The Pribram-Bohm holoflux model lays out an implicate spectral domain and an explicate space-time domain that are in constant bidirectional unfolding. Bohm termed that transformative movement between these two domains as holomovement or holoflux. This bridge between the orders occurs at Planck's constant. Planck's constant, which is at the very limit of space, is a subquantum transfer point below which space and time no longer have meaning. Bernard Carr, the mathematics and astronomy professor at the University of London, explains that the universe may have more than 3 dimensions of space that we actually observe, with the extra dimensions being compactified on the Planck scale so that we don't notice them. The implicate order, one of these compactified dimensions, which lies outside of space and time, was considered by Bohm to be both primary and originating. He wrote about it, "What we perceive through the senses as empty space, i.e. unnoticed implicate order, is actually the plenum, which is the ground for the existence of everything, including ourselves. Consciousness," he wrote, "is to be comprehended in terms of the implicate order, along with reality as a whole. The implicate order is also its primary and immediate actuality." In thinking of the implicate and explicate orders, we also might want to consider the Mobius strip, which Gebser uses to describe integral consciousness. It seems to be the Ouroboros of integrality, if viewed in terms of the holoflux model, as it exemplifies the constant unfolding between the explicate and implicate order as it creates us and we create it. It is an act of both discovery and creation. This bidirectional unfolding of the holoflux model leads us back into the realm of quantum mechanics and how there is a commingling and co-creating that is at work. Let's remember that in the ever-present origin, Gebser discusses how the eruption of integral consciousness sprang forth from the realm of mathematics, more specifically Carl Gauss, who disproved one of the rules of Euclidean geometry and discovered non-Euclidean geometry. Its basic premise is that there are more than 3 dimensions in space. Einstein's theory of relativity identified a 4th dimension as that of time, or as what he referred to as space-time. Quantum mechanics was coming into being at relatively the same time via the discoveries of Max Planck and Niels Bohr, both of whom received Nobel Prizes in physics. Its principles have not only guided many 20th and 21st century inventions, but changed the very way in which reality is perceived. As regards becoming, futuring, and experiencing, certain principles of quantum mechanics are especially germane. These include wave-particle dualism, the measurement problem, quantum entanglement, and probabilities. Keeping it simple, the implications of these principles are that 1, matter, which we think of as things and particles, is actually made up of flows and waves, that the presence and nature of the observer has an impact on that which is observed, that everything in the universe is connected, we are all part of one large system, and we live in the unknown. So we are all separate and together like individual vortices in the living, breathing river of life. And like nature and the most elemental facets of our biology, our cells, everything happens in relation to everything else. We are always in an act of co-creation with everything around us. Thus, back to McGilchrist's thought presented earlier on, how we attend to life and to ourselves matters greatly. It's a moral issue that will impact how the futuring of everything will unfold. And in the words of Nobel Prize-winning physicist Erwin Schrödinger, he wrote, "We never observe an object without its being modified or tinged by our own activity of observing it. That mysterious boundary between subject and object has broken down." And then just this week in the New York Times, there was an article about quantum mechanics, and Daniel Kabat, a physics professor, wrote, "Entangled objects don't have an independent existence with definite properties of their own. Instead, they only exist in relation to other objects." Finding our way back to the right hemisphere gestalt entails honoring and cherishing, experiencing, or presencing in the moment as our most valued currency. It's a way of living into the depth of each moment and a way of asymmetrical tending that includes the left hemisphere without having it take us hostage via our trained proclivity toward mental abstractionism, reductionism, and re-representation. One of the first crucial facets in the art of experiencing is embodiment. It's impossible to truly experience if we're not in our bodies so that we see, feel, taste, intuit, and smell our experience. And written by David Abram in the book, Becoming Animal and Earthly Cosmology, the world we inhabit, we come to know more of this sphere, not by detaching ourselves from our felt experience, but by inhabiting our bodily experience all the more richly and wakefully, feeling our way into deeper contact with other experiencing bodies and hence with the wild intercorporeal life of the earth itself. One of my mentors and psychologist, Stephen Gilligan, speaks about how people get into trouble whenever they fall into what he terms neuromuscular lock, sort of like Rodin's thinker shown here. I mean, in looking at this guy, it seems like he would have difficulty thinking his way out of anything given his locked up posture. Yet my friend Helen, who is spinning in her living room, seems much more inspired. We come back to that quote in the film by Schelling that movement is knowledge. Or as Nietzsche put it, only those thoughts that come in walking have any value. Or as Sri Aurobindo's view, that the body is the key and that Hatha Yoga is the mystic bridge between the spiritual and the physical being. Or even as one of my patients has decided to walk the Camino del Santiago for inspiration during a difficult transition time in her life, to find her literal and metaphoric path inspired by movement along the sacred trail. And I just wanted to chime in here, sort of missing what you were referring to, Jean-Michel, is the sacredness of working with ayahuasca. But there is this whole, new world that's opening up where this is the work of Dr. Gul Dolan, who is a doctor and neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins. And she's been experimenting and has found that psychedelics can help people reopen to new learning states, even adults, which it usually happens when people are younger, that these learning states are opened. And so that these psychedelics help reopen those possibilities and are especially crucial for people that have addiction and trauma situations. And while we're thinking about ways of being, there's this ancient Chinese thought found in this word virtue or day. I discovered it in a first century Chinese medicine text, but it's really a beautiful example of integrality and asymmetrical wholeness of the left and right hemispheres, or I think of the diaphaneity of the integral. So what we've got in this character is on the left side, we've got a person stepping out into the world with their left foot. So there's this implicit motion, it's all in flow. This person is moving. And then on the right side of the character, there is the heart, mythical, showing through the eyes, which would be connecting us with mental, and taking in the four directions. So everything is imbued with, the somatic, the heart, and the head, the eyes. And so I thought I'd close with a quote from Emmanuel Levinas, a French philosopher of Lithuanian Jewish descent, who studied with Husserl and claimed ethics as first philosophy. And he writes about the face of other and how the trace of God or spirit only comes through in our interaction with and protection of and caring of other. The other takes precedence over our own well-being. Our indebtedness to the other always comes first. And he said in an interview, for ethics, it is only in the infinite relation with the other that God passes, that traces of God are to be found. God thus reveals himself as a trace, not as an ontological presence. And so I just thought I would close today. I want to show the movie one more time. And there I've made some slight revisions to it, so you can look at it with new and different eyes. It's now called The Face of Other. But it's in an expanded beyond the anthropocentric and into what Brian Swim and Wendell Berry referred to as the echozoic, and I might add, I think, the age of integrality. So I'm going to let this run, and then it's got. I'm also going to include the credits, and then we'll be out. Okay, here goes. It's short. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Gonna stop my screen share. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share that with you guys. Thank you so much.
That was beautiful, Jessie. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for
Welcome.
the power of your arts, Jessie, as you have brought them to us before and again today. I'm sorry, but I'm going to, I want to just bring two Gebserian thoughts before, and please hold on to your own feelings right now. Don't let me diffuse any feelings anyone has, but I just want to offer in chat two more Gebser terms that probably will never be popular, but they're very useful. They're very useful. So I'll put it one, and it came to me in the midst of your work and in the midst of today and our conference. There's the first word in chat that Gebser offers us as a tool. Syneresis. This would even, Robert, it connects to your presentation on education. And I'll make that. And then here's the other word that goes sort of along with it, systasis. This is sort of a meta language for what we do in Gebser conferences. And, as you say, well, how does all this go together? Well, in some ways you can say, well, it's already together. How are we discovering it together or whatever? But Gebser says what we are doing, this process, he offers the term syneresis. And that is, we are actively in motion, moving through all the structures of consciousness, and they are dancing and intermingling. Now, put that into an educational model, Robert, and that's what I know that you are endeavoring to do. Gebser also brings us systasis, meaning, as with Ian McGilchrist, who has come up in lots of conversations lately, and one friend who worked with him recently in Switzerland, or wherever it was, Italy. But systasis means we move through systematic thought, but we don't get stuck in the effort. And I will summarize here with my very first experience of Gebser in 1969, as it were. And I was a philosophy student, and some very good philosophy, very good phenomenology, which was the focus. But Gebser came on where I was in a strong philosophy department, very strong philosophy department. But then when Gebser came in, it was like, look, this is a fight no one is going to win. And philosophy often seemed to be that way. A lot of education can seem to be that way. Whose point of view is going to prevail? Who's going to win the fight? And it was with Gebser, look, the fight's there, but we don't have to get stuck there. And there is no last word. And there is no final system that will be the triumphant system. And of course, you've brought all of that out in your presentation, Jessie. But so there's the two words for you if they are ever of value. Syneresis is what we're doing. And systasis calls all entrants. Everyone can bring forth the systemic thoughts and can presentiate. But that's how the future is present in us, is that it is in process. Okay, I've said enough.
I just want to comment, John, because having just joined a philosophy program and going through some very intense readings and such, and it's the whole thing that I've come to realize in a very short time. It's like philosophy is just there. It's not. There's never a final word. I mean, basically, it's there just to be discussed and disagreed with, and new ideas brought up that somebody else didn't quite catch, or in reading a lot of different people as I've been going along, it's like there's I'm sort of, I think I'm trying to find my lineage of philosophers is sort of what I'm feeling. And, I'm and so it's like, who are my philosophical ancestors? And, and I'm very, very early on this journey and this path, but some people, I read them and I'm just like, get me out of here. I'm in a room that I don't even want to be in. And other people I read, like I was reading some actually some Bergson, and it's so beauteous. It's so beauteous. And so I'm sort of feeling like, well, my lineage of people are those that I feel my heart most deeply resonates with, and that I want to try and continue taking their stories and their thoughts forward, and seeing how they're how they shift and morph, given that the cosmos is expanding and everything is changing. And so what's the continuance of the relevancy, and where are the touchstones? Anyway, so that's the kind of discovery that I feel that I'm engaged with in this moment. So anyway, thank you for with the syneresis and stasis. Cystasis. Yeah, thank you. Cystasis.
Like system, cystasis, yeah, and
cystasis, thank you. And syneresis. I literally just looked them up. I was reading because I've got one page where I pulled out every single reference to those two terms in Gebser. I pulled everything because I always found them so kind of difficult. It's like, what is he saying here? Like, what does this word really mean? And anyway, so thank you for chiming in on that. And I love Gebser, and it's an ongoing relationship. He's in my lineage.
With Glenn now, the fact is that you love Gebser.
I do. I always have, ever since I met him.
Feel free to chime.
I can't have left you all speechless. Come on. Such a rowdy group. Come on. Yes, Michael.
I'm sorry. But to say the syneresis and cystasis, Gebser is also going to say there is value here that is most important. So it's not a valueless game. Levinas has much to say there, and I appreciated your bringing Emmanuel Levinas into the conversation.
Yeah, he's one of my ancestors. He's in my lineage, I decided.
Who are your other lineage ancestors? David Bohm, I know.
Well, I'm really, well, I don't know. I really am. I'm very, very new and quite naive, to be really honest with you. So I'm trailing along, but the quantum stuff is incredible. It really is. It seems to me where, science and philosophy meld together. And, and I think people get so turned off from it or don't refer to it because it's too confusing or something, or it's too hard. But yet it's just, it's a really gorgeous orientation of what's going on around us.
Have you ever done writing about the holoflux and Chinese philosophy? Because you would be perfectly situated to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I may, I'm just, as I said, I'm literally one month in.
Okay. All right.
I'm a child in the woods right at this point,
Oh,
Jessie,
very humbled, very humbled.
I really enjoyed your presentation and the amount of time that you must have put into this presentation. I remember watching one that you had done previously, and you're just incredible amount of time and information. It's to me, it's like drinking from a fire hose sitting here. And I got to the part where you had the thinker in there, and you talked about the thinker not being a, and I'm leaning in, and I got my hands like this, and I'm exactly, and I go, whoa, I need to pay attention.
It's like we all need to just get up and start whirling in our living rooms.
That's right. I need to start whirling around.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's sweet. Thank you so much. Yeah. I know. You guys have to know that when I create any presentation, I'm just doing it for myself. It's like kind of whatever I'm feeling passionate about in the moment. And so it's really nice to have like people who I could share it with, you know.
Yeah.
It's a real gift. I'm very, very grateful. Very
That's
grateful.
always the best presentation. So you're doing the right thing. Thank you, Jessie.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Glenn. I loved your singing, by the way. I loved when you were chanting. It was
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
I was,
Did you have something to say,
go ahead.
Mike?
I'd wondered if you were familiar with Ravelli and
No.
quantum mechanics, and also Ruth Kastner. And
Okay.
they're both trying to get away from the hermeneutics, this sense that we are testing something or exploring something or experimenting, and we have an influence. They're trying to get at quantum physics without the human, or the human as part of the nature of the universe. They're both very fascinating, and they, like many others, they go back to Brahman and other spiritual paths, the Tao. It's like,
Can you write?
their
I'm sorry, go
quantum
ahead.
physics is in the universe, is in the cosmos.
Yeah. I mean, could you write their names in chat or send me an email, Michael? I'd be so interested to check
Okay.
them out.
Yeah,
All right.
Carlo Ravelli and Ruth Kastner.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a different take. You know, they incorporate the Schrodinger and
Okay.
the others. Bohm. I've read a lot of Bohm, and
Yeah.
but they have a different take. That's not hermeneutic. That's not so subjective, or not subjective maybe at all. So it's very interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, because I think it's got to, it's got to include everything. It's yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I was gonna say something. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, you
You're on.
can.
Yes.
You can, you can.
Okay, I was, I agree with the current ideas, and I very much enjoyed your presentation. I was thinking about science recently, and there are the measurement problem, it's called, and people in physics are really trying to extricate, as Mike said, the human, because it makes it too messy and it's just doesn't seem to fit. And with the physics, and everything is undergoing a transformation, it seems to me right now, a transformation of thought, because things are falling apart. These particularly in combining the two, the quantum and the classical. But
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to say was about just to speak up for some aspect of rationality and science in particular. And I listened to Wilczek, the Nobel laureate, last week, and he made this statement that it moved me, because we have possibly a model of the way to behave towards each other, not ideal, but we're human, but the science way of being is to allow different hearings, to let people give their thought, and to be listened to with respect in general, everything's in general. And so it's a community of disinterest, that people are not biased. They can't be biased in the physics world. And so something comes along that doesn't fit, then you have to think and incorporate and not attack. And in that sense, he thought of it as a community that could be well emulated, and I very much agree with that.
Mm,
We have no role models like that.
mhm.
You know, there's nobody, you know, like you listen to the news and economics, even the soft sciences. It's not like that in the hard sciences. It's not every man out for himself to get his voice out there. It's like, if you've got a good voice, you eventually will get it out there,
Yeah,
but it has to be good.
yeah, great. Yeah. Thank
So
you, Helen.
Eileen, you just sparked a thought that kind of pulls Glenn's presentation together with Jessie's, and that's Aristotle's line that man is the measure of all things. And if we are becoming a new type of human, you know, one that is interconnected with everything else in the universe, you know, we will have an entirely different how do I say it? You know, like, what if the flea was the measure of all things as well as the galaxy? We're the perspective of, you know, as Lakoff and Johnson put it, of being, you know, in this human body with a front and a back and a side and a side and a top and a bottom, is going to be, you know, like blown out of the water when we realize our new beingness.
Right. Ideally, yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Jean-Michel, you've got your hand up?
Yeah. For me, Jessie, there was one question that popped up really strongly for me while hearing your article. Is that, of course, we are in a world ruled by science, which is really a product of the Enlightenment, which has its own paradigm. For example, yoga is completely alien to this paradigm and has completely other assumptions. And in this sense, the question for me is that, you know, is mind or consciousness emerging from the brain, or is the brain emerging from consciousness or the mind? So
I mean, yeah.
it's a question, all right? There's no fixed answer to this. Or is there a difference between the brain and the consciousness? Is there a difference between matter and spirit? Maybe there isn't. That will be Aurobindo's point of view.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, it, you know, it seems with that holoflux model that it's kind of, and maybe I'm not going to speak this well, but it seems like it's, you know, it is that looping, that unfolding. So, you know, one thing comes in and that's received, and then that's then fed back in a new manifestation. So it's a continuous kind of ongoing process. Where both are interconnected. Right.
Yeah,
so
like that article that you mentioned in the New York Times about the black holes. It's
the black hole
Kleinian.
article.
It's a Kleinian surface that.
Yeah. Which, you know, Gebser cites in Ever-Present Origin, you know, talking about integral consciousness. And so he was, God, how inspired, right? So inspired.
Yes, moving with the Mobius strip into the Klein bottle, and with work with perception and perspective, and all of that's very key Gebserian work. You know, the nature of our perception, how we perceive ourselves and place ourselves.
Right.
I was
Right.
ad hoc one, you brought in Schrodinger, and he's a hero of mine, but Schrodinger had a statement, it just goes on and on forever. And he said, and this is pretty close, an absolute barrier between subject and object has never existed.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it's never existed. But we've been acting as if for hundreds of years, right? Which is, yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for the wonderful presentation. It should have been first because it's a really great introduction and depth of Gebser. Really loved it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sweet. Thank you so much.
Well, and the first shall be next. We're going to hear from Jean-Michel. By our previous agreement, we will now take a